Welcome to Troy's Outdoor Pursuits and Projects. Today, I'm going to start building a boat. If you watch any of my other videos, you see I like to hunt out of a homemade kayak. Well, I've also got this layout boat that I built many years ago, and this scull boat too, and they both serve their purpose. The layout boat doesn't paddle very well at all, and is only practical for what its intended use is. And the kayak's a little bit unstable, let's say, in the worst kind of weather conditions. The scull boat's bigger than what I like to haul around. So I'm thinking about building something in between the layout boat and the kayak. I've actually made a sketch of this boat a few years ago, and I'm going to let you have a look at it here pretty quick. Looking through my plan book here, this is a sketch I made quite a few years ago. I don't know if you can see that okay, but the boat's about 9 to 10 feet long. I want to keep it under 10 feet just for portability mostly. It'll be have about a 30-inch bottom width. It'll be about 40 inches overall width. The cockpit will be, I don't know, 25 to 28 inches long and 5 to 6 feet long. At this time, I'm planning it to have a bit of a pointed bow and a little bit of a square transom, because I do intend to put a motor on the back. A couple weeks ago when I was at the cabin and I had a little time on my hands, I put this together. So this is just kind of a scale model of the same boat. Flat bottomed. That's not necessarily a good thing. It's not going to paddle really well, but it's going to draw very little water, so I can put it really shallow water. I'll put a chine, maybe a few of them, to help it track. Kind of a lifted bow, kind of low profile. I'm not sure if this transom will be like shown here, or if I'll raise the whole back deck up. I might raise the back deck up a little bit, or I might double end it like this. I just don't really know yet. But being that it's about just under 10 feet long, the first thing I'm going to have to do is to join some plywood. So I've made this scarfing jig that'll help me cut about a 7-degree bevel on the end, the 4-foot end of a sheet of plywood, 2 sheets of plywood actually, so that they can be lap glued together to create a really strong bond. And I'll have essentially a 15 3/4 foot long sheet of plywood in the end that I can cut whatever I want out of it. Something I failed to mention is the boat construction. The construction method I'll be using on this boat is called stitch and glue. You're basically cutting out pieces of thin 1/4-inch plywood, stitching it together at the edges, and then fastening it with epoxy fillets, and then eventually covering it with epoxy resin and fiberglass mat. It makes for a fairly lightweight and very strong construction. So I got to cut this scarf joint now. I've cut many scarf joints in the past on material up to 3/4 of an inch thick. I have never used this method using a skill saw. I've used planers and sanders and routers, but never a skill saw. So we'll see how this works out. If it doesn't work out, I can always start over, because I've got plenty of plywood. Okay, I had to make a few passes, but it came out pretty good. It's not perfect. I don't know if it's because my dull is not terribly sharp, or maybe it's too thin and it wants to wobble a little bit. I got a little bit of a wide spot right here, but I'll probably go over it once with a sander and call it good. But Got a super thin line right across here. That's exactly what I wanted. Not bad. Okay, I've got my scarf joints done. I've got some wax paper underneath the joint. I've got a heavy bar here to weight it down after I glue it. I've got a straight edge over here, and I've got my epoxy ready to go. So you got to mix this stuff really good. It's great stuff though. And I'm going to use this a little bit here just to wet in the joint, because that wood is super porous. And if you mix up your epoxy and lap the joint together and put your weight on it, the joint will soak up, the wood will soak up all the epoxy, and you'll end up with a dry joint or a hollow joint. Hopefully this small amount will do what I want it to do, but just going to paint a thin coat of this on. Now when we mix up the epoxy for the finished joint, we're going to mix in some wood flour and some colloidal silica, which will give the epoxy a little bit of body to fill gaps and a little more strength. I don't know if you can see it, but the heat really, it thins the epoxy almost immediately, and it'll start sucking into the wood. And that's what I want it to do. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and mix up, I think, a couple pumps of epoxy. I hope that's enough. Now I'm going to add some of that thickener I was talking about. So this is just wood flour that I got from my sander, just a pinch of it. Add some of that, and this is colloidal silica, which is very commonly used in now I got this mixed up really good. I'm going to let it set for about 5 minutes or so. I've got a reference line on there that helps a little bit, but ultimately I'm going to use a straight edge to get it just right. And when I put pressure on this, you can see the squeeze out. That's good. You want that. Put a weight. Let this set up a little bit and then put a little more weight on it. Alright, it's all glued up. Weighted down, and we'll leave it overnight. Work on it next chance I get. But as you can see, I got a 16-foot sheet of plywood. Okay, I got this 16-foot sheet of plywood that I scarfed together. Turned out just fine. I cut it at about 10 feet. Got a 6-foot piece left over, or a little less, but the scarf turned out fine. Really good. had the 6-foot piece of plywood left over. I split it in half and I scarfed it together, so I've got a 12-foot by 2-foot piece that I can split down the middle and use for the gunnels on either side. Okay, I've got the bends molded into the bottom of my boat now, so it's time to start putting the sides on. So what I've done is I've marked off 4 lines on the boat in various locations, equally spaced, and I made up these 4 frames that will get screwed through the bottom of the plywood boat to hold them in place. After the 4 frames are attached, I'll screw this strong back, which is just a really straight C-channel out of plywood, to the bottom of the boat so I can keep the bottom in alignment while I attach the sides. I'll also be able to move the boat around and work on it in different positions using the strong back. I've used that strong back to build a couple kayaks and a scull boat. It's worked out pretty well. I hope it works for this boat too. Okay guys, I just want to give you a look at what the bottom looks like attached to those intermediate frames and the strong back. I'll eyeball this from the front and the back to make sure it's nice and straight and true, and that'll give me something good to work off when I start attaching my sides. So I want to show you the scarf joint. Pretty strong. Okay, I got the sides kind of mocked up and got the bow drawn together with some wire. Okay, I'm stitching this the edges together now so that the boat will hold its form until I start glassing in the corners before I actually fiberglass the whole boat. So just drilled holes with a drill, and then you just use copper wire. 14 gauge works really good. 12 gauge is too heavy. I don't know, that you could use something smaller, and I think I have. I think I used welding wire, like 030 welding wire before. I think that was a pain in the butt. But the holes get filled in with fiberglass, and this boat's going to be painted, so it really doesn't matter. I'm not worried about the aesthetics at all. Structurally, it'll make no difference. These will come out after the fiberglass is cured, or the resin has cured, that'll hold the boat together, and the glass mat goes on. Pretty simple, just kind of takes a lot of time. Alright, just finishing up the last stitch here on the stern of the boat. It's taken me a little while to get to this point because it takes time for this plywood to bend and kind of hold its shape. Don't know if I mentioned, but I use a little moisture to do that. 1/4 inch plywood bends, but it takes a little moisture and a little time to get it to take a good set. So I've got it set pretty well, and I've got this wired together. If any of these wires break on either end, it could kind of spring apart. But I'm going to go ahead and flip it over and see what I got to work with. I'm hoping that the boat runs true and my lines look good so that I can put the gunnels, the top gunnels on. So let's flip it over. Had some screws pop loose. It's looking pretty good. I got to make a cut here somewhere. That's going to take a little bit of decision making so I can wrap the top piece around. The idea is for this to come to a point, have a little bit of a flat deck here on top, maybe for a dog. Anyway, it's coming along. I'm going to give you a closer look at this thing so you get a better idea of how it's put together. I can still make a little bit of adjustment if my lines aren't perfect because those copper stitches are a little bit flexible. That gives me the ability to make any subtle adjustments I might need to make to straighten out lines like that one right there, which are not that big a deal. So remember I said this boat was going to be made with stitch and glue construction. Well, as I've already shown you, the stitches are already in. The copper wire is holding the corners together. The temporary frames are holding the shape of the boat. So the next step is to add the glue. And the glue is simply going to be epoxy resin that I'll pour into the corners. I'm going to wet the corners first with straight epoxy resin, and then after that sets up just a little bit, I'll add some thickened epoxy to create a fillet in the corners, which will make that joint really strong. Equal amount of sawdust here, maybe a little bit more. Quite a bit. We'll mix that up really good. And we're going to make it into a pretty good paste. And then I got this idea of using vacuum bags and making my own little pointed vacuum bag applicators, and man, this works really good. Just roll it up like this. This works great. Show you how well this works. I hope you can see this. This lays in there really nice. This epoxy is really messy to work with, and this is working really good. Now my fillets will eventually end up being much bigger than this, but they'll get a second coat after I pull the stitches out. And this doesn't have to be perfect, but because this will get done again. Just kind of smooth it out like so. Give it a nice little radius. Then I'll pull those stitches out at some point and do the same process all over again. I hope this isn't a mistake, but I've just decided to narrow my cockpit by 1 inch on each side. I think that will make the boat a little more stable, maybe a little more rigid because of the geometry, and give me a little more cover to keep stuff dry along the gunnels. Hopefully it's not a mistake. Like I said, I'm kind of building this as I go. I have no plans, so you just change as you go if you want. Okay guys, I just want to get you a little close up here of the boat after I've got the bottom sides on, and you got the gunnels cut for the top. Okay guys, we're at the halfway point for this build. Just want to show you what it looks like. I got the transom stuck on. Of course, those intermediate supports will come out. The screws will come out of the gunnels and the wire. I'll build a deck for the front and for the rear. I'll glass the inside first, then probably the deck's on, then flip it over and glass the bottom. But that's going to come at a later date. So if you're interested in building a boat, or if you just like following my build, certainly like and subscribe, and be sure to tune in for that next video that's hopefully going to come out in I'll say a couple weeks, but it'll probably be more like 3 weeks. All right guys, have a good one.
Thank you.